As I mentioned, my name is Matt, and I am the Business Services Specialist here at the Addison Public Library. Just a summary of services that we offer here for jobs and career seekers. I can help you get started with your resume. We can review resumes and cover letters. We can do mock interviews. We can talk about applicant tracking systems, all of that good stuff to help you with your career. We also have a new job toolkit, which kind of is a summary of pretty much the entire career search process as we see it in a post-pandemic world. And we have physical copies here on the second floor of our library, but we also, it's also digitally on our job seekers page. So if you go to addisonlibrary.org/job seekers, you'll be able to see those. And I will have the link at the end of the PowerPoint as well. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about pre-interview work, and we are going to talk about interview strategies, post-interview tips, the various interview styles, and then most importantly, marketing yourself. As I've mentioned in previous streams, 85% of jobs are found through networking, and you have to make those networking connections and market yourself in order to get some roles as well. Okay, so let's talk about pre-interview work. The most important thing for pre-interview work is doing your research. Researching the company you want to work for, researching the industry, identifying the interview style of how the interview is going to be handled, which you can kind of get those clues as you receive the invitation for the interview. It might say you'll get the email from the HR person, or it might be an automated email from their applicant tracking system, and it'll say, "Congratulations, we would like to schedule an interview. Please select time. Your interview will be with XYZ person." Okay, so now you know there's going to be 3 people in the interview room, and it's going to be an interview panel. Or it might just be one person, and then you know, okay, it's just going to be a conversation with the hiring manager. You want to research the company, look at reviews on Google and Glassdoor and Indeed, all great sites to look for reviews of the company to kind of get a better sense of if that's a company you want to work for. Take those reviews with a grain of salt. It's very easy, especially on like Glassdoor and Google, to see who might be someone who was disgruntled or didn't like the service versus who's giving a genuine review of the company. Check recent news articles. Have they been in the news recently with anything that's going on? Do they have a cool new project happening, or did they just lay off a few people? And then you're interviewing when they just laid off some people. That might not be a company you want to join. Take a look at their goals, missions, and values, as well as their culture. And this is my favorite tip, especially because I'm a librarian. I work in public libraries. These are public buildings. Go and visit them. So if you're looking to join a public entity or a government building, those tend to be open to the public. So take a look and see. Especially if it's a place you want to work, you're going to be going there every day. It's kind of going to be like a second home to you. So make sure it's a place that you want to work, and then that kind of gives you also a little sense where you can take a look and see how the other staff are interacting with their customers or their patrons, or and you can see how that is. You want to prepare any references and contacts that you have, just notifying them saying, "Hey, I'm going to interview at this place." Sometimes you may want to do that after if you feel like the interview went really well. You can reach out to your references and say, "Hey, you might be receiving a call from XYZ company, just a heads up." So make sure you answer your phone or check your email if you are asked to provide a reference. And then you also want to research the typical salary range for that position. ONET online, so if you just Google ONET or ONET online, that's a great resource from the Department of Labor that you can pick your industry or pick your general industry that you're going into, and you can put in your zip code even, and then it will give you the general salary ranges for your state, your metropolitan area, and the United States as a whole. So great resource on ONET Online. That's a great place where I recommend individuals when they're going through salary negotiations, use that data because that is coming from the Department of Labor. You want to prepare your notes and what to bring. So here's everything that you should bring for your interview. You want to bring printed copies of your resume, just in case if the hiring managers and the people you're interviewing with, if they don't have one. Sometimes you might be interviewing with a hiring manager and then two coworkers or people you may be supervising. So those subordinates may not have all of the information that that hiring manager was seeing. So you want to just make sure that you have copies for everyone who's going to be in the room. I usually recommend bringing like 5 copies of your resume. That's a pretty safe number. And make sure you review it. It's good to have a resume in front of you, so make sure you have a copy of yourself. But review it to be able to be sure that to elaborate on your skills, accomplishments, and highlights from your previous employment. Interviews can be very nerve-wracking for people, and when people get nervous, we sometimes forget things. So it's always good to have your resume in front of you that you can look down at and re-jog your memory, so that you can be able to really shine and show this potential future employer your skills. Also bring a list of questions you want to ask the employer. One of the worst things that you can do at the end of the interview when they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" and you say no. I always say, think of something that you want to ask them, like ask about the company culture, ask about what the typical day looks like, ask about what the biggest need for the company that this position can help with. Think about when you're thinking of questions to ask them, think that you already have the role and you've started, and what do you need to know at your 30, 60, 90-day mark? That's also a good question to ask. So think of some things that you want to ask them. And then does your interview require you to bring a portfolio? This is very common in creative type roles like graphic design or marketing. They may ask you to submit your portfolio before they even select you for an interview. So be sure that you have some copies of your works that you are comfortable sharing, and that demonstrate your creative skills as well. Okay, now don't forget the most important details. So select your outfit ahead of time, try it on. As you see, I'm dressed very casually. I am in an industry where we can do that every day. But for an interview, I'm not going to dress like this. I'm going to put on a suit and put on a tie. Because it's something that I don't necessarily wear every day, I want to still make sure it fits. So try it on ahead of time. If not, then go buy anything you need. If you are unable to buy anything you need, there's organizations like Poise for Success. They're located in DuPage County. They have a clothes closet that those individuals that identify as female can go in and select outfits for their interview. The People's Resource Center, also located in DuPage County, can get you connected with various resources to get you those interview outfits that you may need. Also map out your route. We're in a technological era where we have a computer in our hands most of the time with our smartphone. So make sure you type in the address a day or two before to make sure you know where you're going. I always like to add one layer because this is just me personally. If I know I'm interviewing at 11 o'clock one day, I'm going to check the GPS at around 11 o'clock, so I can kind of maybe get a decent sense of what the traffic level is going to be. Because you also want to build a little buffer in your route, and you want to make sure you want to arrive at least 15 minutes early. And it's okay if you're just sitting in your car in the parking lot for a little bit of time, but you want to kind of maybe enter the building 10 or 15 minutes early to let them know that you're here for your interview. Determine what you need to bring. Are you going to bring a notepad with you, a resume, a portfolio? Figure out what you're going to need to do and need to bring. And if you're able to, do a practice interview. I'm more than happy to do a mock interview with you. Or you can, one, I sometimes also recommend try it in a mirror. And so then you can see how you're representing yourself. Um, but or like grab a friend, a family member to practice interviews. We're going to go through different types of interviews and interview techniques. So this is a great, those are great opportunities and low stakes, no pressure opportunities to test out those skills so that when you are in that high stakes pressure opportunity of interviewing with your potential employer, you already have practiced it and it's like like you know it like the back of your hand. And lastly, interviews are two-way streets. This is something that a lot of people forget about. A lot of people think when you're in the interview, the organization is just getting to know you and getting to know, and you're interviewing with them. But it is a two-way street. You're also interviewing the hiring manager or the panel that you're with to get to know the organization and get to know those individuals. You're potentially going to be working together, so you want to make sure like personalities mesh well. You agree with what the organization is doing. All of those good things. Okay, so let's talk about some interview strategies. Behavioral interview question. So behavioral interviews are one of the most common, especially in service type industries. And you can kind of get a sense of what a behavioral question or a behavioral interview is going to be because they're going to tell you, it's going to start the question about like, tell me about a time when, or tell me when this happened, or have you ever experienced this? All of those types of phrasing can be little keys for you to determine, okay, this is going to be, they're going to want to see how I responded to a situation. So it's going to be, tell me about a time when you provided excellent customer service, or tell me about a time you had to manage a difficult customer. All of those questions are going to be very common, especially in service type roles, as I mentioned, but that's going to be your key in to those types of questions. And how you answer them is what we like to call the STAR method. And the STAR method is an acronym and it stands for situation, task, action, and result. Some people will use the START method, so another T at the end, and that will just, the additional T is what is called a tie-in. But I like to just go with the START method, and it's a form of storytelling, and you can look at it that way. When you're asked a behavioral question, they want a story, they want an example. So if you use the STAR method, you're going to lay down the situation, what you did, or describe what it was, what you did there, and then what was the result. And I always say too, it's okay to use an example when you may have failed or it may not have gone as you wanted to. That's a-okay. And it shows like, yes, we're all human, we all make mistakes. Some things don't happen the way that we want to go in. But if that's the case, I always then say, make sure you mention what you learned from that situation and how you're going to avoid it going forward. So for customer service, as an example, tell me about a time you handled a difficult customer. You can say, okay, here's the situation. I was working the checkout desk at the retail store. A customer came up. They wanted to do a return. Great. We have the situation and task already set up. The action is, okay, so I took their return. I noticed they did not have a receipt. I worked with the customer to say, okay, well, we can offer a store credit rather than a full refund. They got irritated and they wanted a full refund. And then, so after working with the customer and going through the system, I was able to provide a managerial override to give the customer a one-time refund for this without a receipt. We just went through the action and result and that whole STAR method and a very, very quick response. So always follow that STAR method. And say, okay, if the customer, and then if it was an example where they left angry, you can say, okay, maybe going forward, what I learned from this situation is maybe I'll ask a manager to see if we can provide that managerial override or one-time exception or and that kind of thing. So if you are using an example where you may have failed, always remember to mention what you learned from that example. Okay, and then selling yourself. Interviews are all about selling yourself. So what is your elevator pitch? We'll go over how to format an elevator pitch a little bit later in the slides. But what is your elevator pitch? If you are stuck on or if you're riding up on an elevator with the hiring manager and it's just you two on the elevator, what are you going to tell them about yourself? This is your one-on-one time with the hiring manager. What are you going to say? Are you just going to stand there and be quiet? Or are you going to be like, hi, I'm Matt. I have an interview. I'm writing up with you for, I believe we have an interview later. Here's a little bit about me, just so you know. And then we'll go from there. And then you just head into your interview. Um, Meaningful language and pauses. So I really want to focus on the pauses part of this bullet point. Because in interviews and when you're nervous, sometimes people tend to ramble and keep going and keep going and keep going. And you may feel like it's a rapid fire interview where they ask you a question and you immediately have to have an answer. It is okay to take a minute and think about the question and think about your response. I always recommend too, sometimes water is a great kind of way to pause yourself. So if you ever feel like you need to take a break or take a minute and think about it, you can take a sip of water. And usually water is acceptable to have in an interview. They may even offer it to you in the interview. But if not, bring a water bottle with yourself as well. And a lot of questions I get is, should I use humor? Should I exhibit my personality? Um, it is, I would say it's whatever you're most comfortable with and sense the vibe of the room. If you feel like, okay, the interviewers are more relaxed, you're relaxed, you can let your personality show a little bit. But if you feel like this is just a very rigid interview and they are just all business all the time, one, is that the environment you want to go into? And then two, if that is, then mimic that personality and that, yeah, mimic that personality just to be sure, like, okay, because you don't want to be that one if they're all rigid and you're trying to tell a joke and it doesn't land and then it looks bad, or that you're trying to exhibit your personality and it doesn't mesh well with them. That kind of could be a negative impact for your interview. Clarifying questions. This is a great way to also take a pause. You can ask them to restate the question that they're asking you. You can also ask clarifying questions at the end of your interview. Just make sure it's related to the job, the organization, the company culture, typical workday. Make sure it's work related in a nutshell. And you can always ask like what the employer enjoys about the company. A lot of times these hiring managers, they may have been with the organization for multiple years. So they may have started in the role that they're hiring for and have worked their way up the corporate ladder, and they love to talk about it. And then it also shows that there's a sense like, okay, there's something about this organization that shows there's growth and that people have done it, and you can use those individuals as an example for yourself. Okay, and wrapping up the interview. So you've gone through all 15, 20, 25, however many questions they've asked you, and it's come to the end. You've asked your questions already. They've answered them to your satisfaction, and now it's time to close out the interview. Sometimes the hiring manager will do this, but these are things that you just want to make sure that you do. You want to thank the interviewer or the interviewers, just thank them for their time. Ask for feedback if they have any. There may also be a potential lack of feedback in this sense. They won't give you direct feedback at the end. They might just say, yeah, it was great. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day. Or it might just be a read of body language that you might need to think about. And then lastly, ask for next steps. Um, Sometimes the hiring manager will offer these next steps, being like, okay, we're going to continue the interview process. You're the first person we interviewed. Here are, we're going to be interviewing for the rest of the week. You should hear from us about next rounds early next week. Okay, great. So now in the mind, you can say early next week, they may have a decision, give or take a couple days. The hiring process is very fluid and flexible. So sometimes they shouldn't give you like, we're going to have a decision by March 8th. It's probably not going to be that rigid. And so then on March 9th, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I don't know if I haven't heard back from them. Is that a no? The hiring process is very fluid and flexible. So they're going to give you generic responses. Um, but then that gives you a little bit of sense. Okay, well, if I haven't heard, they said early next week and I haven't heard by late next week, maybe I can follow up with them and just express my interest again in the position. Okay. So here's some post-interview tips. Following up, always send a thank you email. Or if yeah, typically a thank you email. Most people don't send thank you letters anymore. You can do that. But I always like to just say send a thank you email. It doesn't have to be immediately after you have your interview. I recommend it not being immediately after your interview. Um, but what you can do is if you want to, you can type it up and then have it schedule send for a few hours after your interview. We have a thank you email template in our new job toolkit that you can use as a model. Really, it just recommends that you thank the person for their consideration and you thank them. And then you mentioned something that you talked about in the interview just to re-jog that hiring manager's mind of what you talked about and you as an individual. And we recommend that you send a thank you email after your interview and even after you get a response from them about their hiring decision. If it's negative and you did not get the job, I'm sorry to hear that, but still send a thank you email. Thank them for their time and consideration in that sense, and express that you're still interested in the company. And if there's any positions that they have that they feel you might qualify for after meeting with you, send it your way. That's just another way to like not burn a bridge with an organization, as well as it gives another opportunity for your name to be in the hiring manager's head. And it might just be like, oh, well, yeah, we didn't hire Matt for this position, but he's really qualified for this position that we have opening. We just haven't posted it yet. So maybe I'll just send him that one and he can apply for it. You never know. Some people have gotten jobs that way. You also want to revise any notes you've taken during the interview. So when you're in the interview, you might be really scratching down your notes and it might be a little discombobulated, might be a little all over the place. So take that time on a fresh sheet of paper, reorganize your notes, um, and make sure that your thoughts are in order. And then check in after some time has passed. Like I had mentioned, if they give you a rough estimate on when they're going to have a hiring decision and you haven't heard from them after that time or a little bit after that time, always follow up, express your interest in the position, and then it kind of lights the fire a little bit with the hiring manager. So then they know, okay, this person is interested. We gotta ramp up our decision-making process here. And then if you don't succeed, like I had mentioned, I am so sorry that you put in all this effort and you did not get the role, but it's not the end. Still send that thank you email. Keep going, send out more applications, have more applications out there. Um, I've been in those shoes too. I've applied for jobs, haven't gotten them. You just keep moving. You just keep moving with it. Don't get discouraged on if you don't get the job offer. Okay, so some interview styles. Virtual interviews, kind of like how we are right now. We're on Zoom. They might be on like Teams, or it might be like WebEx, or sort of any other platform that you do. The real thing with virtual interviews is your environment is key. You want to make sure the noise level is okay. Do you have a good internet connection? How's the lighting in the area? Um, do you prefer to use a laptop, or do you prefer to use a desktop? Test out any software that's needed. If you haven't used Zoom in a while, is your Zoom up to date? Have you updated it? If it's on Google Meet, is your Google Meet up to date? Make sure it's all updated. Um, and dress as if you are interviewing with the individual in person. And that is from head to toe, is how I recommend that. Don't just do it from the waist up, do it from head to toe. Because it puts you in the mindset that you're in an interview, one. And then two, I've heard from some candidates, hiring managers, they sometimes may ask you to like stand up if you are physically able to. And if you are dressed from the waist up in professional attire and you have basketball shorts, the vibe kind of doesn't mesh well with that. So make sure you're dressed as if you are meeting this individual in person. And look at the camera when you are speaking. I'm guilty of that, of not doing that. In fact, right now on this call, I'm guilty of not looking at the camera. Um, we say to look at the camera because, especially if you have multiple people in the Zoom room, you don't know how they're ordered. And someone might be asking you a question and they might be in the upper left-hand corner, but on someone else's screen, they're in the bottom right, and you are like looking left, and you're actually looking away from those individuals. But if you're looking at the camera, it's like you're providing eye contact. A good tip for that is some people will put a post-it note on the back of their camera, like facing up, like saying like, remember to smile, or they'll have a smiley face or something that they can look at directly, where then they, to make it seem like you're making eye contact with the individual. And lastly, have your resume and notes ready. The best part of virtual interviews is no one can see what is behind the camera. So you can have a whole full-blown like poster board behind the camera with your resume and your highlights and the skills you want to make sure you highlight and mention, and the accomplishments you had. Or if you have that smiley face post-it, no one will see that. Only you see that perspective. Phone interviews. Again, with phone interviews, your environment is key. Make sure your noise level is okay. There's no barking dogs behind you. There's no children screaming. You're not taking the phone call in a mall or any other busy place. You're kind of in a quiet area, and that you have good, strong cell signal as well. If you know in your house, that you have better cell signal in one area over another, take that call in the better cell signal area. You don't want to have the call get dropped halfway through. You also want to avoid any distractions. So make sure you're in your own space. There's nothing going around you, and make sure that you can fully focus on the interview. And you want to answer the phone with a clear and pleasant greeting. So you don't want to be like, hey, yo, what's up? You want to say like, hi, this is Matt. And answer all calls from unknown numbers. If you're applying for a job, answer the call from the unknown number. If you do miss that call, it's okay. We'll talk about voicemails in a second. But when you're speaking with the individual, make sure your tone of voice is more upbeat, is happy. You can hear a smile. So make sure you're still smiling. Don't necessarily talk like this. It's not the best way to do the interview. But if you talk like this with the interview and you're more upbeat and you're smiling, and you saw in my facial expression, yeah, I was kind of dull, didn't have any expression here, but I'm smiling now. You can sense the change in that tone of voice. And also have your resume and notes ready. Okay, now we're going to talk about voicemails. with voicemails, be sure to update your voicemail to a professional greeting. And it can be a predetermined voicemail. Sometimes if it says like the robotic email, it's like you're leaving a voicemail for 630-123-4567. That's okay. Or it can be like, hi, you've reached the voicemail of Matt Williams. I'm sorry I cannot come to the phone right now. Please leave your name and number and a brief message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Both are professional. You don't want it to be same way as you're answering the phone. You don't want it to be like, hey, you've reached Matt's voicemail. You know what to do. That's not the best way to go about it. Okay, screening calls. This is going to be your most common type of phone interview is going to be a screening call. It's usually with an HR representative, and they're really just looking to check off the boxes that you meet the minimum requirements for the job. So they're going to confirm your name, your contact info, the position you're applying for. Do you have the right education level? Do you have the top three skills that they're looking for? Um, it's really just gonna be like a check before. It's meant to be a screen to screen out all the candidates that don't meet those criteria. This is also a great time to show a little bit of your personality and your interpersonal skills. You're talking to an individual who works at the organization and who talks to a lot of people. HR representatives in an organization, they are talking to a hiring manager, they're talking to the executive team, they're talking to staff, and they're talking to other potential candidates for this role. So this is your first time to really show that you are the best candidate for that position. So an interview panel. An interview panel is typically done in person, but it can be done virtually, especially in today's environment of hybrid work or fully work from home type work. It can be on a virtual platform. But any panel is considered a panel, or any interview is considered a panel if it's more than one interviewer. So, and it's typically between 2 and 5 people. So if you remember back to when we talked about what you need to bring to your interview, I said bring about 5 resumes with you. That's just in case if you have a panel. Typically panels are not going to be more than 5 people. Although I have been on panels where it has been more people. I'll tell you the story of in college, I was a resident assistant or an RA, and we were hiring for someone who was a high level in our housing and dining department. That had a panel of 20 people. We had staff from we had the director of housing and dining, the associate director of housing and dining, a few other higher ups. We had our complex director, our complex directors, we had our some of our building directors, and then we even had some resident assistants. I will say that is a special circumstance because it's an academic environment where you are going to be responsible for the housing and dining for an entire university. So they wanted a lot of different opinions from different levels of the organization to provide feedback on these individuals. That was the only time that I was on a panel of more than 5 people. So it's very rare. It is possible, but they should tell you when they're scheduling the interview with you, how many people are going to be in that interview, or they'll say how many different groups of people are going to be in that interview. They should mention that to you. And then it's so important when you are on a panel to answer each question with roughly about the same amount of eye contact with each individual. Now, you might be thinking, Matt, I'm trying to think of an answer. I'm trying to think of everything else. How do I also think about making sure I keep the same amount of eye contact with everyone? Don't worry, we naturally do it. As humans, we naturally do it, whether we think about it or not. You don't just want to look at the person you answered the question to. If it's a virtual interview, like I had mentioned, you're only going to be looking at that camera because everyone's going to have that eye contact, that same eye level of eye contact with you. But if you're in a room, it's okay to bob your head around. and make sure that you're answering to each individual and not necessarily the highest level in the room, the highest level position in the room, or just the person that asked the question. And then bringing up copies of your resume. I can't stress this enough. Bring enough copies of your resume with you. Like I said, five's a pretty decent number. Okay, second round interviews. This is a great sign. So you passed the pre-screen, you maybe have done one in-person interview, and now you're invited for the second round. This means that you are one of the top candidates for this position, because typically when you're interviewing for an organization, it's gonna be about 2 to 4 interviews, including the phone pre-screen with the HR representative. And then that is just depending on the level as well. They're probably going to do less interviews for a lower level position than a chief executive officer level role. But second rounds are a great sign. These are often used to narrow the candidate pool even more. And this typically has more intricate questions and more testing type scenario based questions. So we had previously talked about using the STAR method for those behavioral type questions. The second round of interviews is when those questions are going to be very prevalent and you're going to want to have good examples of like providing excellent customer service, handling a difficult customer, working on a team, working in a solo environment. Those 4 questions are very standard across all industries. So you want to make sure that you have pretty decent examples of those. Informational interviews. So these are great. I'm going to minimize myself so you can all see those words. These are great networking tactics. And they're used by job seekers to gain knowledge of any industry or role Um, and it's more so of you're not applying for the job, but you are looking to get more information about the industry. And with that, I'm seeing on the stream that you all can't see it still. One second, my apologies. Let me do that. Okay. Okay, so with informational interviews, it's a networking tactic used by job seekers to gain knowledge on any industry or role. So that is when you are meeting with someone in the organization to tell them about their typical day, just getting a better sense of how this industry works. If you're a recent college grad and you're not familiar with the industry, or with the company as well. This is a great way to kind of get your foot in the door a little bit too. It can lead to job shadowing, but the most important thing about informational interviews is that it is not meant for getting a current job or interviewing for a current job that's posted. It's more so to get information about the industry as a whole. So now we're going to talk about marketing yourself. With marketing yourself, we want to talk about your elevator pitch. As I mentioned in my example at the very beginning of this presentation, you're stuck on an elevator with the hiring manager, you're riding up on the elevator with the hiring manager. You have until they get to that floor to tell them about yourself. So it's typically 30 seconds long. And what the elevator pitch is it goes over who you are, what you do, what you're looking for. It has a hook statement and it has a closing statement. So it can be something like, hey, I am interviewing with you for this role. My name is Matt Williams. I have worked in this industry for 10 years. I can bring XYZ skill to the table, and I look forward to talking to you further once we get into that interview room. Done. There's your elevator pitch. You got their attention by saying, hey, I hear you're the hiring manager for this. You mentioned yourself. You gave a quick spiel of your experience and what you bring to the table. And then your hook and your closing was kind of combined by saying, um, I'm looking forward to talking with you once we get in that interview room. So very quick, very simple, but also very nerve-wracking. Elevator pitches are very, they're hard sometimes for people. And that's why practice is perfect. Try your elevator pitch in a mirror, or with a friend or with a trusted colleague. Make sure you are really honing those skills as well. There's also organizations like Toastmasters that focus on public speaking. And those are great organizations where you can practice with one another and really hone in on those public speaking skills. Um, You can also use the STAR method to prep your elevator pitch. So with the STAR method, like we had mentioned, it's an acronym for situation, task, action, and result. So these might be some things about, you might use the STAR method to talk about a skill that you have real quick in your elevator pitch, or yeah, that's pretty much the primary way. But you're going to also use these to have ready examples in the back of your mind as backup points for the interview. Okay, so some final thoughts is resumes are two-way streets. Remember that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. A lot of people forget that. So make sure that you're not one of those people. Um, you want to make sure that you have questions for them at the end of your interview. Like I mentioned when we first talked about questions at the end, the worst thing that you can say is that you don't have any questions at the end of the interview. That is a sign that the hiring manager may take that you don't care about the position, or that you don't care about the company or anything like that, which that's not the vibe you want to give off. That's not the vibe that you have, because you're interviewing for this role. So you really want to just make sure that you are continuing to express interest, and you do that through questions about the hiring manager's time in the organization as a whole. Like I said, the mission, vision, or values of the organization, company culture, typical day. What's your 30, 60, 90-day benchmarks? Those are good questions to ask, because if you get that role, especially the 30, 60, 90 days, you now know what the hiring manager's expectations are going to be for you. So you know, okay, at 30, at the 30-day mark, I remember in my interview, they said I need to know XYZ. So I need to make sure in my first 30 days, I know XYZ. And then at my 60 days, I know add on to what XYZ does, and then know those skills. And then 90 days, keep going forward. We say 30, 60, 90 days because that's also the probationary period for an employee. So if the organization you're applying for and you get the job, you are sometimes considered a probationary employee for your first 90 days. So during those 90 days, depending on the organization, your benefits may not kick in until after the 90 days, or it may kick in after the first 30 days. It's more common to be after the first 30 days, and that's just for HR to process all the paperwork. But if you're considered a probationary period employee during that time, they may also fire you if you are not meeting standards. So, and that's an easier way to do that. Unfortunately, if you're an employee, a probationary employee, you're not considered a full-fledged employee. But then there are also organizations that take you on right away. A lot of union jobs, day one, you are a member of the union. You are now protected by the union. Or a lot of organizations, if they don't have that probationary period and you're just hired full-fledged as an employee on day one, great, take advantage of that as well. Your benefits will kick in probably after the first 30 days or the first of the following month of your start date. All of those things. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Matt, and I'm the business librarian here. Here's the direct link to all of our library resources for job seekers. Like I said, our online new job toolkit is there as well. So please take a look at it. There's a lot of great resources in there, a lot of great tools.